Guys, welcome to the I Love CVille Show. My name is Jerry Miller. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we are live in Charlottesville, across Albemarle County, Central Virginia, the Commonwealth, and the world on the I Love CVille Network. Every social media platform known to mankind, airing the show as we speak. And we continue the discussion that is near and dear to all our hearts. And it's pretty much what is best for our kids. And I started the program yesterday with the same way I'm going to start today. We are certainly divided communities, and it's not just here in Albemarle and Charlottesville. It's not just Virginia. It's everywhere. And we're divided, but we have one thing in common. We're parents that want what's best for our kids. And we have different outlooks of what's best for our kids. And it's important to emphasize that there is a common denominator that can unify us again. And it's our littles, it's the next generation, and taking good care of them. One more item before I get to Dr. Wolfe. I know there's going to be tremendous participation, and we have a lot of questions already, Dr. Wolfe. The questions are going to have to come from a mindset and foundation of kindness. We don't mind being disagreed with, but if they're not going to be respectful, they're not going to be relayed on air. Judah Wickhauer is our fabulous director. Judah, thank you. Foundation of the show, the man behind the screen, which you've gotten to know of late. Why don't we, if we can, go to the two-shot and welcome Dr. Wolfe to the program. Karyn, you are now live on the show.
Hi, Jerry. Thank you so much for the invitation.
My pleasure. I'm so grateful that you agreed to join. Why don't you take a moment, and we'll then take a deep dive into the topics of choice. But before we do, introduce yourself to everyone that's watching.
So my name is Karyn Wolfe, and I've been a pediatrician with Pediatric Associates of Charlottesville for 17 years now. So I've gotten to know a tremendous amount of families in our community, and I've been taking care of our children for a long time. Since the start of the pandemic, my colleagues and I have been in the front lines of managing COVID-19. We have been there when we didn't have PPE and testing supplies, and we worked with local resources to get those supplies to our office as well as other offices and schools. We didn't have testing supplies at the beginning, and then we didn't have patients. Patients were literally afraid to come in. We were begging parents to bring their children in for their vaccines. We weren't seeing them. To continue paying our staff, the partners of the practice didn't pay ourselves for several months because there were no patients and no income. And now it's flipped. We are literally drowning in sick patients and COVID testing. But from the very beginning, we have worked closely with the schools and the Blue Ridge Health Department, trying to get our kids back in school. And now we're doing everything we can to try and keep them in school. That is our primary goal. And that is what I'm here to talk to you guys about, is how to keep our children in school and keep our community safe while doing it.
These cameras in a vulnerable setting like a talk show have a way of bringing unplanned emotion. And I noticed when you were giving that answer, your voice was shaking a little bit.
Well, I'm also nervous.
Yeah. Can you put in perspective the emotions that you have experienced? I mean, you're a mom. You have two kids.
Yeah.
Not just as a frontline doctor, but as a mom. The emotions, the vulnerability, the uncertainty, the fear. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced anger. I'm sure you've experienced incredible praise. I mean, it's the gambit, right?
It's the gambit, and I mean, we've been there. I have seen my children suffer through all of this. The first 6 months of the pandemic, when my then, 7-year-old daughter wasn't in school, she slept in my bed every single night. And my husband had to start sleeping in the basement. And I've seen the devastation firsthand. I've seen my teenagers come in with depression, mental illness, new eating disorders as a result of quarantining at home and not having in-person school. My kids are both now in in 2 different mask optional schools. So I am terrified of what's going to happen as more and more schools choose to go mask optional. We've been angry, we've been terrified. In the beginning, we didn't have PPE and we didn't know how dangerous the COVID-19 was going to be. I've cried for my patients, I've cried for us, and now we're just exhausted. We're so exhausted. And of late, with the new executive order, a lot of us, myself, I'm speaking for everyone, but myself especially, has felt like it's almost all for naught, that I don't have a voice. And I felt like I've had a voice for 17 years until this point. And I get it, parents are exhausted, I'm exhausted. None of us, pediatricians especially, we're exhausted. We don't want the pandemic to continue. We want it to end yesterday. But we have to do the right thing. We can't force it to end before it's safe.
For a couple of items of reassurance here, you got a lot of people that are in your corner that are watching, that are giving you props right now. I want to highlight Melissa, Daly Young, Misty Philpott, I'm sorry if I messed up your last name, Misty, is watching in Wilmington, North Carolina, and she's giving you some love from North Carolina. Scott Aaronworth, thank you, Dr. Wolfe, for everything you do. Virginia Beach needs someone like you. He's an attorney watching in Virginia Beach. I'm not sure if this is your husband or not, but William Wolfe
that's
is
him.
watching the program over on Twitter. And he's given you, of course, some love and some props as well. All right, so show is yours. You watched yesterday's program. You've been active in the shows with participation and comments, and they've been welcomed. You saw yesterday's show. The platform is yours. How would you like to respond to yesterday's show?
I think yesterday's show is dangerous. I mean, to put it bluntly. What happened yesterday, and I can go into more details on why I feel this way, but you have 2 respected community doctors presenting this beautifully wrapped product and handing it to a population of absolutely exhausted parents, telling them exactly what they want to hear. We can stop this. And they wrap it in such a way where, yes, we want to return to normalcy. Yes, we want to keep our kids in school. Those were their first comments. And then it moves into ways that are discussing doing things that are completely contradicting keeping our kids in school, and that is removing the mask mandates. So I think parents, this toolkit, as you mentioned yesterday, was used at the Fluvanna School Board as one of their pieces of ammunition to remove the mask mandate, and that shows how dangerous this is.
Fluvanna County has removed the mask mandate. Orange County has removed the mask mandate. Augusta County is doing so on the 14th of February. Madison County, we learned from you. The Covenant School has.
Yes.
This hits close to home.
Yes.
For you.
Yes.
One of your children there. We also learned from you, Charlottesville Catholic has.
Yes.
And am I correct in saying you were the foundation for petitions?
I was the foundation for the petition at the Catholic school.
At the Catholic school, and this petition, and I'll get out of your way and throw the microphone back to you, but this petition was an attempt to galvanize the parent body at Charlottesville Catholic to stand up and reimpose the mask mandate. If I'm correct in saying this, and help me out, this was a decision that perhaps was even out of the hands of Charlottesville Catholic School administration and was a direct reflection of leadership in the Richmond Diocese.
That's correct.
Okay, so the show is yours on these topics. Anywhere you want to go, and then I'll ask some specific questions.
Okay. Well, I think the most important thing to talk about is masks in school and mask mandates. And there were data, if you can call it that, presented yesterday stating that masks don't prevent the transmission in schools. And that's completely inaccurate. If you can go straight through the CDC and see 3 very well done studies looking at masks in school. There was one out of Arizona where they picked schools that had mask mandates and schools that didn't. And it showed that mask mandates had a 34% reduction in COVID outbreaks in the school. There was a similar study done in Michigan that showed a 65% decrease. These studies are statistically significant. There was enough power to show that these outcomes were accurate and can show that masks do reduce the incidence. There's also a review posted in the Journal of the American Medical Association last February looking at multiple studies of mask mandates and transmission with and without masks, and they all show that masks greatly reduced the transmission. Some were even looking at cloth masks and showed a 50% reduction in transmission with cloth masks. These were adult studies, but in pediatrics, we often have to kind of extrapolate adult data to our pediatric patients. And then I get a lot of comments, or I've gotten a lot of pushback about, well, if you want your child to wear a mask, your child can wear a mask. But mask wearing is only beneficial if you're blocking the exhalation of COVID-containing particles and then also blocking your ability to inhale those particles. So it's not a matter of just the person who wants to wear a mask wearing a mask. Everyone needs to wear a mask for it to be effective.
Yesterday's show, I try to identify trends or feelings within the community. And I know feelings are not facts, but it seems like we have 3 groups here. The 3 groups that are materializing are, the first group is very pro-mask mandate. The second group that's materializing is the parents that are pro-choice. Mm-hmm. We want to send our kids to schools with a mask on or without a mask on, but it's our choice as parents and not the government's choice. Mm-hmm. Then the third group that is materializing is the group that is vehemently opposed to masks with children. And those 3 groups, again, have one thing in common, is each feels that they are acting with the best interests of their kids. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're parents. Right. You have kids. We just want our little ones to be safe and have better lives than we did. But clearly, those 3 groups are in conflict in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. 2 of those groups, the pro-choice and then the group that is we don't want masks on our kids, have more commonalities. Right. Than the first group, which is vehemently in favor of masks in schools. One of the common denominators of those second and third groups is the uncertainty of what masks can do from a socialization standpoint. Mm-hmm. And the concern is, take my little guy who's not 4 yet, and he goes to Pediatric and Associates, and you guys are incredible with Pediatric and Associates, it's incredible with our son. You guys are fantastic. I worry, and I've said this on the show, I'm not sure how this is going to impact him from a socialization standpoint, reading expression, seeing people's mouths, and then you compound that with additional screen time that he's certainly had in this pandemic, and then you compound that with more isolation that he certainly has had during the pandemic. I mean, half of his life has been spent in a pandemic. I'm going to throw all that to you about masks, screen time, virtual learning, and isolation from peers. And that seems to be the foundation for the pro-choice parents and the parents that are vehemently opposed to masks in schools, and they rattle off those reasons.
Right. So the first thing I'm going to there's separate issues, that the isolation and the screen time and I forgot the third one, time at home, are all related to COVID-19 and the risk of COVID-19 and transmission in schools and having to be out of school. So when the children were home in quarantine, or not quarantine, but virtual learning, when all the schools shut down, they all had more screen time. Many gained weight, many developed mental health disorders, and that was a direct result of not being in-person school. Masks are what are keeping our kids in-person school. So they're going to have less screen time. They're going to have more socialization with their peers. They're going to have healthier diets by wearing the masks and staying in schools. As far as what the masks are doing, both the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Health, Language, and Speech Association have made statements on their website that there is no evidence that masks are causing an increase in speech developmental disorders. And there was a great study, I think it was out in a hospital right outside of Chicago, that took over 80 children. They were age 7 to 13, so a little older than yours, and looked at their ability to interpret facial or emotional expressions with partially covered faces. So they used dark sunglasses or they used masks. And they showed that those children were quite capable of interpreting emotional facial expressions with partially covered faces. And then the last thing to think about is a lot of these littles are at home for a majority of the time, and we're not masked at home. They have grandparents who they see, and siblings and parents, and they're not masked. So they're getting a lot of time to analyze and practice facial expressions.
Great answer, and frankly, that's where our son is right now. My in-laws have been in town for weeks, and he's at home with them, and he's interacting with them, just absolutely magnetized to them now because he sees different people in the house besides mom and dad.
Exactly.
So that is very much what our son is going through right now. You have a lot of people that have your back right now on the feed that are giving you props. Anna Brooks is giving you props. Marcella Fauché giving you props. Becky Gordon. Pilipowski. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry, Becky, I messed up your last name. She's giving you props. She says, so grateful for you, Dr. Wolfe. Thank you for being a fierce advocate for science in our kids. David Pope says, Asheville School has had a mask mandate and most of the students live on campus together. While some are day students, they have had fewer than 5 or 6 cases of COVID over the last year and a half, or about 1 or 2% of the students during that time. Now, some of the parents are, Kelly Jackson is giving you props. Dr. Wolfe is an amazing doctor. She knows her stuff. I see parents from Charlottesville Catholic and parents from the Covenant School and school board members and leadership in the community watching the program. So you have a vast audience here. Now, some of the parents also are on the other side of the fence.
Sure.
Okay, and that's fair.
Yeah.
And we understand
Absolutely.
that. So this is one of the parents. Her name is Jennifer. She asked that I not use her last name. And she's in Crozet.
Okay.
She says, please explain to me how a cloth mask that is not worn properly throughout the day, and I ask my kids to wear their mask properly. We know they take them off, and they're taking them off at snack time and at lunchtime, how this is going to prevent the spread of Omicron. And then she also adds this. We know that the impact on children is not nearly as severe. Why isn't this being emphasized more on the show?
So the first question is that it's not preventing the transmission of Omicron. It's reducing the risk of transmission of Omicron. So theoretically, when the children are eating snacks and lunches, they're placed apart from each other. So there's less transmission or risk of transmission between the children. But any coverage we can get covering the nose and mouth for as much of the day as we can is going to reduce the risk of transmission. And I can tell you that these kids wear the mask better than half the people I see at the grocery store. They really do a good job, and I see them in the office down to 2, and they do a good job with their masks. So again, it's not perfect, but it's what we have, and it's a lot better than nothing. So the second question was, it's traditionally, or for the most part, not causing severe disease in children, and we're not denying that, but that's not zero. We're still seeing a ton of children get hospitalized. We have the highest number of COVID-related hospitalizations for pediatric patients right now than we've had the entire pandemic. And yes, it's these patients, for the most part, are not dying, but they're in the hospital, and that's not nothing. That is traumatic for everybody. There are interventions that are having to be done as a result of that while they're in the hospital. So this disease is not mild for everybody.
More parents and perspective coming in. In fact, my fingers, if you can tell, are rapidly attacking this keyboard over here as Dr. Wolfe is offering perspective. I promise I will try to get to as many of these comments as possible across Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., Instagram. Here's what's confusing for laymen. I'm a layman. My wife and I, parents have no playbook of how to be parents, and we're just trying to survive. Right. We're just trying to get from wake up time to bedtime and keep our kid safe and learning and moving in the right positive direction. It can be confusing as parents when we read a toolkit authored by 13 doctors and we read their bios and see their credentials and realize that, as you mentioned in the beginning of the show, respected people in the field, like trusted names in the field. Why is there this vast dichotomy, or like this vast like crossroads between this 13 respected doctors here? You're an incredibly respected doctor and stakeholder in this community as well. Why are these perspectives so different? It's confusing for us.
Right. I'd like to point out one thing. I watched and commented on the video yesterday, or on the interview yesterday, is Dr. Vergalis, who was the author of the mask section of the toolkit, said on the interview that he does not think we should remove mask mandates now. You can kind of go back and look at that interview, and I was shocked by that. But he said it very clearly, that he and his family and his children are continuing to wear masks, and he does not think now is the time to remove the mask mandates.
And I think that was and you're right, I think that was in response to the question that I asked, are you surprised that Governor Youngkin, who is a politician and not a man of science or medicine, from day one, at the peak of Omicron, at arguably the worst time from a infection or cases standpoint, I mean, that's now.
Right.
He said first thing he did in office was remove the mandate.
Right.
Now, he did promise all of us last year that he was going to do this.
Right.
So technically, this was not a surprise that he did it.
Right.
Although when he was making those promises on the campaign trail, COVID was not nearly as rabid as it is right now.
Right.
So that was Dr. Vergalis' response to that, where he was a bit caught off guard that the governor chose to do it at this particular circumstance.
Exactly. So I think that is an important take-home message, and then that's why this toolkit is all the more dangerous, because that's not how exhausted parents are interpreting it. They're interpreting it as, look, masks don't do anything, we need to remove them now. And as pediatricians, we're seeing this. I mean, we're neck deep in this every single day. After this interview, I am going to do COVID testing out in the parking lot in 36-degree snow. So we see it, we know it. And another thing is, look at this from a practical standpoint, okay? Every symptom at this point, we're at a point where, well, let's do this first. Monday, we did over 100 COVID tests in our practice alone. Last week, we had a 45% positivity rate. Do the numbers. That's a lot of COVID in children in the community right now, okay? Add in any runny nose, cough, fever needs a COVID test. That child is sent home from school. That child has to go get a COVID test, which I don't know how many people in the community have had to hold down a screaming toddler who is pleading for you not to put this thing in his nose because he's had it 6 times before. It is horrifying. So we do that. This poor child undergoes that. He has to wait out of school 2 days before he gets the result. If that is positive, he has to be out of school 10 days. If he has an unvaccinated sibling at home, that sibling has to stay home an additional 10 days. And now you have 2 parents who work to earn income for that family, one of whom now is staying home 20 days, possibly more, if they get COVID from their child. So from a practicality standpoint, this is not the time to get rid of anything that is reducing the transmission of COVID in our schools.
What do you say to, and I'm empathetic to this group here. We have been in this pandemic for almost 2 years. It's 2 years in March. I'm a diehard sports fan. I vividly remember March of 2020 when the ACC tournament was canceled, okay? And parents say, this is going to be with us constantly. It's going to be with us all the time. Parents also make this comment, and you make this comment in certain places, you get lambasted when it's compared to the flu.
Right.
Okay, and depending on the circle you're in at the time, you can get lambasted for making that statement. I know I personally have on this show. You can also have parents that tremendously agree with you. What do you say to the group of parents that are like, it's always going to be this case. It's always going to be rabid after, Christmas and New Year's and Hanukkah and in the winter when we're outside and we're getting together to celebrate. We're always going to have this peak. And we just have to deal with it. It's the flu, and it's something that's going to be a part of our everyday life. How do you respond to that?
We're not always going to have a 40% positivity rate. We're not always going to have this huge portion of children that are still vulnerable and unable to be vaccinated. So there is an end, and there is a great article by a woman. She's called Your Local Epidemiologist, and she said, how does this pandemic end? And I think you're right, it's going to become endemic. It's going to be part of our society, but we need to get the numbers lower, and we have to get our populations vaccinated so that we can ensure that they are safe if and when they get COVID-19. Our vaccination rates in children are still extremely low, and the 5 and unders aren't vaccinated at all at this point.
And that's a topic that is being big time on social right now, is should we get 5 and unders vaccinated? In fact, I sent myself, and Dr. Holland is watching, she's got some comments for you here.
Okay.
She was a guest on yesterday's show. I sent myself this link this morning when trying to do some prep for these interviews. I mean, you guys are the experts, so sometimes it can be even intimidating for me to have Dr. Vergalis and Dr. Holland and Dr. Wolfe on the show, because you guys are such great experts in your field. I'm just trying to ask appropriate questions. So I'm trying to do some research here. So Sweden, the country, and this is all over the news today, it broke this morning, Sweden, the country, is deciding against recommending COVID vaccinations for children 5 to 11 years old. Came out today. Sweden has decided, I'll read the first few graphs of the article, then get Dr. Wolfe's response on this. This is from Reuters. It's on the Associated Press. Just Google it and you can find it. Sweden has decided against recommending COVID vaccine for kids aged 5 to 11, the health agency said, arguing that the benefits do not outweigh the risk. This is from the health agency's top official. Quote, with the knowledge we have today with the low risk for serious disease for kids, we don't see any clear benefit from vaccinating them. She added that the decision could be revisited if the research changed or if a new variant changed the pandemic. She says kids in high risk groups can already get the vaccine. So I'll throw that to you, get your take on that, and then throw as a second part to it, I mean, parents are worried, especially the super littles, of getting a vaccine that has maybe not years of empirical data behind it.
Right.
Your take on those two topics.
So it does reduce severe disease. Okay, we are seeing MISC in our children from COVID infection, mild and asymptomatic. The Pfizer COVID vaccine reduces the incidence of MIS-C by 97%. So it's very effective in that way. And we don't know what's going to happen with future variants. The vaccine hasn't been around for a long time, but the technology, the mRNA technology, has been around for a long time. They've been looking at this. We have 2 years of data essentially in adults. We have almost that in the older kids. There is no reason to think that it's going to have increased risks in children. The data so far has shown minimal side effects and no long-term side effects for the vaccine in children.
Dr. Holland, one of yesterday's guests, the suggested removal date is February 15th. New York has set a date of February 20th as a suggested removal date. So you have the doctors watching from yesterday's show.
Right.
And I believe some of the other ones are watching on Twitter as we speak. Message to them. One of the takeaways for me from yesterday's interview was the adaptable nature of the toolkit. The doctors indicated that the toolkit is going to be, for lack of a better phrase, malleable and a work in progress, one that adapts to circumstances as they see fit, because we know science can offer conclusions for Friday, January 28th, 2022.
Right.
But those conclusions could be very different on Friday, March 28th, 2022. Feedback, advice that you want to give, and she says there's a 25% positivity rate in the Blue Ridge Health District now.
Yeah. There's also schools shut down. There's classrooms at Venable that are shut down right now because of high cases. There's an entire preschool right downtown that's shut down because of high numbers of cases. So we're seeing it. The numbers are too high right now. My suggestion is we keep the mask mandate in place through the end of the school year. Just get through the school year.
So into end of the, so that maybe May, early June is what you're saying?
Exactly. Parents signed up for the school year knowing there were mask mandates in place in all of our schools. Let's keep them in place. Let's get the children through the school year. Let's get the numbers down. Let's see where we get on the vaccines for under 5 and reassess for the upcoming school year. I'm so frustrated that the governor chose this time to put this into place. He could have easily come into office and said, listen, I plan to do this when the numbers are down. At the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't even suggest sending our kids back to school until the positivity rate was below 10. And here we are at 35% in the Blue Ridge Health. Oh, no, it was 28.6 today, so it is going down. Suggesting removing one of our mitigation strategies. It's mind-blowing to me. The numbers are going to go down. The kids are going to get vaccinated, but they're not there. We're not there yet.
Joanne Mackey, what % of that positivity rate are hospitalized, die? My 5-year-old granddaughter had positive COVID for 3 days. Then she's fine.
It's not high, but it's not zero. These are children. There are children dying. There was one in Stafford County just this week who died of COVID-19. One is too many.
That's fair. What do you say to the parents that the mitigation strategies, the ramifications, or the collateral damage associated with mitigation strategies can far outweigh, from a negative standpoint, than the pandemic itself?
That's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is the mitigation strategies are keeping children in school. The devastating mental health I saw when kids were not in person school was unbelievable. I would see multiple new eating disorders, depression diagnoses, and anxiety diagnoses a day, starting summer 2020 and into last fall. And I've discussed this with my colleagues, and they've seen the same trend. Our number of new mental health diagnoses have dropped dramatically since the start of the school year, when all of our children were back in school.
Jeff Camerath, he asked this question: do you believe it's possible to get COVID to zero? If not, what is or who is the arbitrator of what is safe and respectable level of COVID for kids to return to normal?
I think we're looking at getting our kids vaccinated so we know that they're safe. COVID's never going to be zero, but 30% is too high. And again, we didn't want to send our kids back to school initially until the positivity rate was less than 10. So I think that is a start of a goal.
Here's a question. This is a straightforward question, maybe the toughest one, but a fair question. Okay, you in past shows identified that you were frustrated with the mask optional approach that the Covenant School and Charlottesville Catholic School are utilizing now. Mm-hmm. Is your solution to that mask optional choice pulling your kids from school?
I don't have that option. I don't have that option at this point. Aside from the masks, the education, we're so happy where they are.
Yeah, they're great schools.
Yes, so I will say I've upgraded both of their masks. My daughter now wears a KN95, and her friends are doing the same. And I'm lucky every day I ask, were there any unmasked children in your classroom? And luckily, her classroom has 0 unmasked children.
There's 0 unmasked kids?
In her class.
Okay.
Covenant's not the same. Covenant's very different.
How about this is kind of almost like a sociology, anthropology type question. I compared earlier in the show that if we're not careful, earlier in the week, that if we're not careful, that masking could be the 2022 version of educational segregation, mm-hmm. where we'll have divided cafeterias on one side, no longer the quote, unquote, like jocks or cool kids, mm-hmm. or kids that are focused on academia, the glee club, the band, you know how mm-hmm. cafeterias are doing. It could be mask on one side and no mask on the other side. Mm-hmm. Concerns about that? And this is obviously not a question for you as a physician, but this is a question mm-hmm. just as both of us being community stakeholders here in Central Virginia.
I do. I worry about that. I send my children to schools that require uniforms, so that just takes that whole part out of it. Not everybody believes in that, but for me, that's really important. So I do feel like it can lead to some segregation and some comments. The other thing is there's peer pressure. Peer pressure for my child. Now she has to kind of go in and stand up for herself and wear a mask despite other children not wearing masks. My son is in high school. It's probably even more difficult for him to continue wearing a mask when 25 to 40% of the upper school is not masked. And that's unnecessary.
This is from a mom in Crozet, who I believe has 2 kids. Are you advocating for an indefinite continued masking, as there will always be respiratory viruses that put the vulnerable at risk? Or if not, what metric would you deem as safe to go to an unmasked environment?
Again, I feel that COVID-19 is new. It has taken a huge toll on the American population, adults and children, adults especially. I feel that getting our children vaccinated, getting our vaccination numbers up in children, which they are not high at the moment, and getting the COVID-19 numbers down is my goal. I don't want children to be indefinitely masked. I want there to be an end to this. I miss faces as much as everybody else's. I have patients who I see out at the pool and other things who don't even recognize me without a mask. So I want to get rid of masks as soon as it's safe to do so. I will say with the drop in flu numbers, it will be interesting to see what happens with our next big flu season, if some people do choose to wear masks at that point.
I think that was a conversation I was having actually last night at the dinner table with my wife and my in-laws, that the flu numbers have been so low, And my wife in particular, she has asthma and she often gets sick. And over the last, I guess since the pandemic, she has not gotten as sick.
Yeah.
And I've, with her blessing, kind of offered some personal perspective, is very cautious with our son and this pandemic, where I have stated that we'll cut to the chase here. She is, my wife is in favor of the mask mandate. I am a parent that is in favor of pro-choice. I want the ability as a mom or dad to make the decision for our son. I think that if we were both pro-choice, that our son would still, because she's so cautious, go to school with a mask on. And that is just something that us as a couple are having to navigate.
Right.
Healthy, and I'm no pro. We're 5 years into this, but it's a compromise. It's been a compromise.
Right.
And in this particular circumstance, it's been me who I felt has had to compromise more on this, because from her stance, she is very adamant about this. And as a husband, and I'm speaking just for me, you learn to pick which roads, or I don't want to use the word battles, but which you want to pursue.
Right.
So here's the question I have for you. With our son, who is under 5, we get this all the time in our social circle. Should we be hesitant to vaccinate? Should we check if he's had COVID? Should we consider antibodies? And should we utilize all this information before he does get vaccinated, because he's so little? He's 35 pounds. He's 35 pounds.
Yeah.
He's 3 years old.
Right. Right.
And Pfizer, the talk a couple weeks ago, 10 days ago, was Pfizer potentially as early as next month could have a vaccine out for the 5 and under crowd.
Right.
I'm sure you hear this constantly.
Yeah. And
how do you respond?
It's safe.
You say it's completely safe with conviction.
It's safe. We've seen it. We've looked at it. The 5 to 11-year-olds have gotten it. They were studied before that. It is safe. Antibodies aren't helpful. We don't know how long antibodies last. We don't know what they mean, if they offer any protection. So it is safe. I wouldn't hesitate. I didn't hesitate with my daughter. I didn't hesitate with my son. None of my partners hesitated.
Michael Guthrie, Karyn, you are handling these questions very well. I've been peer pressured several times because I wear a mask. That's from Michael Guthrie. Trisha is watching. California. She says, and if we can tell, again, our favorite leaf blower who we hired to maintain our courtyards and not to blow it, we got to get him on the right schedule, too. Trisha says this: we are all going to get COVID. It's endemic. Why not focus on how to be healthy and boost your immune system? And she says masks are pointless and just an attempt to prolong the inevitable. You're not buying that.
No.
What do you say to the folks that we're all going to get COVID? It's going to happen. Just get it over with.
We're not all going to get COVID.
You believe that?
I believe that. I believe that. And I believe that nobody should get COVID before they have the choice to be vaccinated. So we're putting these young children at risk. And people who have are eligible for vaccines. We have a lot of populations who don't have access to the vaccines yet. They live in rural areas. They don't have transportation. The parents have multiple jobs. They have not been able to access the vaccination yet. So I just don't think that it's reasonable to say we're all going to get COVID.
So this is a tough question. This is a tough question, and this is a question that I'm sure you've had to address in the past. You're active on social, right?
Yes.
You're very active on social media. You certainly are very active with the schools your kids attend, and you're very in favor of everyone getting vaccinated. And last year, in the middle of last year, you grew very frustrated about folks not getting vaccinated, and you posted and mentioned that frustration in a post where you were growing angry about the unvaccinated population. I'm seeing, parents are sending me the screenshots here of the post, and I'm just gonna, paraphrase, where you were feeling less empathetic to those not getting vaccinated. You still stand by that and have any regrets for it at all?
I was angry. It was right before Delta, or right when Delta was hitting, when I posted, and our hospitals were full. We were in a place where things were normalizing. It was at the end of the summer, and I'm sure everyone remembers that. And it was spreading. The vaccine did a good job of preventing Delta. So I still feel that surge was partially, or the unvaccinated adults were partially responsible for that surge, because that was who was primarily getting super sick and transmitting Delta. So I was very frustrated and angry, and we've all felt that way as pediatricians, and it's frustrating. And again, this sense of talking and nobody's listening, and all we want is, as parents, as you said, we all want what's best for our children. I think the difference comes in for pediatricians, my colleagues and I, is we don't want just what's best for our children, but we want what's best for all the children in the community. And that's what we're trying to portray. And yes, there's going to be anger, because yes, we understand the science. And yes, it's frustrating, and sometimes I don't understand why there's such question. And I'll be honest, I have a close family member who is refusing to be vaccinated, and it is so incredibly frustrating and heartbreaking knowing that this family member knows what I do and knows what I study and still refuses to be vaccinated. So absolutely, I was feeling less empathetic. I don't regret it at all. I understand that, in my better moments, I am more empathetic and try to kind of explain, and I'm very empathetic when I explain with my patients why we need to get the vaccine, why we should vaccinate your children, how is it safe. But I was done at that moment. I came back from the beach right into the fall, and here we go with another surge. So
I think you handled that answer extremely well, because that was, I stand by the question. I thought it was a fair question to ask. It's a tough question, but you handled that answer extremely well, Dr. Wolfe.
Thank you.
The long-term implications or the long-term effects of kids with COVID, the now phrase that moms and dads are certainly passing around is long COVID.
Yeah.
And long COVID scares the HE double hockey sticks out of a lot of people.
Right.
Long COVID, any insight you can offer?
It's not a common thing for sure, but it happens. You have patients reporting long periods of brain fog and fatigue. I think those are the major ones. Loss of taste and smell for weeks at a time, which in children who already aren't the best eaters at time can be difficult to navigate. So it's definitely there. I worry more about MISC. We haven't seen what Omicron is going to do to that yet. The MISC curves, if you follow, usually peak few weeks after Omicron or after the COVID-19 surge, and we're just not there yet. I'm hopeful that we see less of that, but that scares me more.
Do you think, it's tough to see down the road, but are we going to have a new COVID vaccination like we have the flu vaccination every year? Is that your expectation?
Right now, I don't know, obviously, and I don't know if that's going to change if we have more variants down the road, but it's looking like the 3 may be the magic number.
3 would mean?
The 2 original doses and then the booster.
Okay.
It looks like that may be the magic number.
Like each year?
No,
or no?
Like
Okay.
we're done.
What we got right now?
Yeah.
Okay, you really think so?
That's what Pfizer was saying recently. I read an article, but I don't know. I think time will tell. They're going to continue to look at antibody levels and transmission rates and, severity of disease. So,
what is the? There's so many comments coming in here, Dr. Wolfe. I'm trying to get to as many of these comments as possible. Obviously, this is such a hot topic. What is the impact of these cold weather holidays and get-togethers going to be with this pandemic? I mean, are we just going to be in this mindset that Christmas and the holidays, the end of the year, fourth quarter, is going to just lead to craziness in January? I mean, here's the thing. It would be so much better for us as a population where we can have clear expectations.
Yeah.
Where moms and dads, friends and family, kids, Januaries are going to stink.
Yeah.
Just get ready. Mm-hmm. But we went into Thanksgiving, and this is just us talking here. We went into Thanksgiving, we went into Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, whatever it may be, and we were like, we've beaten this. Mm-hmm. We've kicked I won't use the profanity I was going to use. We've kicked this. And then now we come in here in January, and it's the worst it's ever been. And it's just so demoralizing.
Right. Yeah.
It's demoralizing. Should we just set expectations for the community that January is going to suck?
Well, I mean, we've done that in the past with the flu, right? Every year until now, we have had a flu season, and it's not always consistent with the holidays, but every year we start seeing it trickle in, and then all of a sudden, here it is. Here's
Should we do that?
I think it's a possibility. It didn't really happen as much last winter. Delta kind of came right in the end of summer, fall. So I think time will tell. I'm hopeful not, but it certainly may follow that pattern.
Oh, man. How about the comments that are coming in? The hashtag was urgency of normal, where the hashtag should be urgency of equity. And under-resourced communities may not have the luxury of removing mandates like Albemarle County has. Mm-hmm. We'll cut to the chase. Albemarle County, City of Charlottesville, even Central Virginia, there's a lot of money here. Mm-hmm. We're an incredibly vaccinated population. And we can make a correlation to, and it stinks to say this because everyone should be vaccinated. I am so pro-vaccination on this show. I am pro-choice when it comes to masks, but I am incredibly in favor of people getting vaccinated. Okay? Not all communities have this level of wealth, and there's undoubtedly a correlation to wealth and vaccination rates. There's a correlation with education and vaccination rates. Mm-hmm. It's probably a correlation of political party alliance and vaccination rates, which is a topic for another show. Removing mask mandates as a blanket statement when so many communities are not vaxxed at our clip, and the dangers or ramifications that could have.
Oh, it's significant. I brought my little numbers in here because I knew I wouldn't be able to remember them all. But the 3 local schools that did away with the mandates just recently, Fluvanna, Louisa, and Greene.
And Orange, too.
And Orange. I don't have the numbers for them. But I wanted to kind of go through the Blue Ridge Health District, and I don't think Orange is in our district. So the current vaccine rates in those communities, Fluvanna, for the 5 to 11-year-olds, 25%. The 12 to 17-year-olds, 50%. Louisa, 15% of 5 to 11-year-olds, and 47% of 12 to 17-year-olds. Greene County, 20% of 5 to 11-year-olds and 55% of 12 to 17-year-olds. Now compare that with Albemarle and Charlottesville, who have chosen to continue the mask mandates. 50% of 5 to 11-year-olds in Albemarle and 88% of 12 to 18-year-olds, and then 47% in Charlottesville of the 5 to 11-year-olds and 90% to 12 to 17. Those differences are unbelievable. So now we have a community with a low vaccination rate and no mask mandate.
Are you fearful that there's going to be a trickle-over effect or a keeping up with the Joneses effect. You look at Albemarle County, it's surrounded by Greene, Louisa, Orange, Augusta, Fluvanna, and within Albemarle, we've mentioned Covenant and Charlottesville Catholic, all have made it optional. And then we have the governor potentially threatening school funding if schools do not respond accordingly to his removal of the mandate. Does it concern you that Albemarle and the city of Charlottesville, its school boards may be forced into this decision? And is that one of the reasons why you chose to come on the show?
I don't know what he can and can't do. So I think I have a hard time believing that that's an option, to actually choose to remove funding from schools because they aren't following an executive order. So I'm just going to sit back and wait for it to move through the Supreme Court and see what happens.
Fair, good answer. This question's coming up on the feed by a lot of parents. I think it's a fair one. Have you, in your experience, seen a level of I don't want to use the word distrust, but professional dichotomy or separation in thought or mitigation strategies? I mean, you got a lot of doctors that are saying one thing and a lot of doctors saying a completely different thing. Mm-hmm. The shows, back-to-back shows today are a good example. Have you in your experience seen that before?
So that's not the case. There are not a lot of doctors backing the toolkit.
Okay.
And I come fully backed by every local general pediatric or pediatrician in the community from all the practices.
You say are backing your side.
Are backing my side. We want what's best for our children, and we know that the mask mandates are what is right for our children. This is coming from all the physicians in my practice, all the physicians at Piedmont Pediatrics, and I don't know about UVA, but I'm guessing most of them. I also have heard from local pediatric psychiatrists and many of the therapists that feel like mask mandates are exactly what we need to keep our kids in school and to reduce the mental health diagnoses. In the toolkit was interesting because it talked about its goal was to keep kids in school, a return to normalcy, which is what they are in school. It talked about mental health disorders. Those are not a result of masking and mitigation. The mental health disorder studies were all from 2020 to 2021 when kids were not in person school. The increase in mental health disorders occurred directly associated with children not being in person schools. This community, our pediatricians, our general pediatricians, our general adult doctors, we believe that mask mandates are still necessary right now. Those 13 physicians are not general pediatricians. There was a handful of academists, there were a handful of virologists, but they are not in the community with these children and these families.
Dr. Holland, one of the 13 from the toolkit watching and commenting. Mm-hmm. Dr. Holland, we appreciate your participation yesterday and your participation today. She thanks you for being on the front lines. Dr. Wolfe, thank you for sharing your opinions and experiences. You are a fierce advocate for your patients. Although our views differ in some areas, I think we agree in others. Thank you so much for being on the front lines. She also acknowledged that the toolkit is malleable. Mm-hmm. So what is the message or the perspective that you would offer to the doctors that are watching, that are a part of this toolkit, that have indicated that the toolkit will change as circumstances change? What is the maybe it sounds like it's going to be a word of caution that you would say to these doctors?
I think that they have the responsibility to talk with the people, the parents that are reading this toolkit, and tell them exactly what Dr. Vergala said, that this is not now. The mask mandate, this is not the time to get rid of the mask mandates in school. If one of the authors, and I don't know Dr. Holland's view on that, says that his part about masks is not what he wants the take-home message to be right now. They need to get rid of that, and they need to tell our community, because this is dangerous.
Parents are asking what your take is on if this could lead to medical segregation of the vaxxed and unvaxxed patients. And interestingly, this is timely in that there was a story in the news cycle about UVA refusing a surgery, a transplant, and you know more about this than I do, but refusing a transplant to a patient based on vaccination status.
Yeah.
So that's really making momentum in the news cycle.
Yeah.
Are we going to see medical segregation based on vaxxed and unvaxxed? Like practices that say, if you're not vaccinated, you can't come to our practice?
I can't speak to that. I don't know. I will say that as a general pediatrician, we talk vaccines day in, day out with our patients. I do not refuse any patients based on their vaccination record, because I feel like I can have those conversations. I get to know them rather than saying, hey, you can't come to my practice anymore because you're not vaccinated. They end up going to see a physician, holistic doctor, whatever, who doesn't believe in vaccines. I take those families in. We talk about it. We have honest conversations. So it's not going to happen in pediatrics. We want those conversations continuing.
Michael Guthrie has this question. Please ask Karyn if it is true that the vaccine is the most researched vaccine ever.
I don't know the answer to that, but there's been an awful lot of research.
You know what? It is not easy to come on a show like this with the amount of people that are watching on social media and answer these questions, and you've done a hell of a job.
Thank you.
Seriously, I sincerely mean that. And I've asked very pointed questions of you, and there's lights and cameras here. You've done a bang-up job. Why don't we start closing the interview with some final thoughts and perspectives, and let's address the obvious topics again, kind of like in recap format. Parents, a lot of parents want the choice of what their kids do from a mask standpoint. Pro-choice has become masked now.
Yeah.
Your message to the pro-choice parents.
So I think at this point, again, I'm going to say, I know we all want what's best for our children, but there is so much misinformation out there that I think pro-choice is dangerous, because parents are not often getting the true information. They're getting misinformation. There was some big blow up on social media about increase in speech delays, and that's not the case. So there's just so much out there, and it's so sensationalized that it's easy to feel like you're making the right choice based on what you're reading, but it's not what's good for everybody. And again, coming from the pediatric community, we want what's best. We want to keep all the children in the community safe. And that means right now, when the numbers are high, continuing the mask mandates. And none of us want our children to wear masks forever. We want them to be gone as soon as it's safe for them to go, but this is not the time.
The message to parents that are fearful that masks are an item of perpetuity, like textbooks and backpacks and pencils. I mean, I'm worried about that.
Yeah.
It's like, where does it stop? You said give it to August, or give it to the end of the school year.
I think it's the safe thing to do. And I'm not saying remove the mask mandates for next school year, because we don't know, right? We don't know what's going to happen. But I'm saying at least get through this year, get the numbers down, let's get the vaccines in the kids, and see what happens.
Fair. And then any closing thoughts you want to offer? You just did 70 minutes here.
I just, we want what's best for kids. We know these families. We love these families. been heartbroken throughout all of this with my patients who have ended up in eating disorder facilities and depressed, and these families are this is why we do it. This is why we are coming in on our days off to do COVID testing. We want to be there for these families. We're not here to take away rights. We don't want our kids in masks unnecessarily. We just want to keep our kids safe until we can move on. And there will be an end. It's just not now.
Has this been the most challenging time of your professional career?
Oh yeah, by far.
Not even close?
Yeah, no.
I want to thank you for coming on the show. I want to thank you for your courage of being a frontline worker. Thank you for your courage of being on this program. I know this is not an easy topic to cover, and you just did for 70 minutes. You obviously care so much about the community. I think that's incredibly obvious here. And thank you kindly for the time.
Yeah, thank you.
We have a ton of folks that are asking where the interview is going to be archived, so you can go back and listen. It's archived on every social media platform out there. So if you want to podcast it, Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts. If you want to watch it with the visual, then I encourage you to watch the visual show so you can see her emotion and how much she cares about the community. That's on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. Then we also archive it on ilovecville.com. That's where all the shows are easily accessible on ilovecville.com. Dr. Wolfe, thank you for participation today and for past shows. And perhaps I could reach out to you again. And I think we both are in agreement here that we just want COVID to get behind us.
Yes,
and the
please.
numbers to subdue.
Yes.
And we can then have a healthy community. Thank you to Judah Wickower as well. That's the program, guys. Have a good weekend, and we close with the message of empathy and kindness in a time of uncertainty and vulnerability with this community. Be kind to each other. Thank you for joining us. Take care. He's going to tell us when the mics are off, Dr. Wolfe, here.